The rain in the city rarely fell with grace. It drove down in sheets, heavy and relentless, slicking the asphalt and turning the evening commute into a blur of red taillights and blurred neon. Inside the Daily Crumb, however, the world was a different climate entirely. It smelled of dark roasted coffee beans, toasted pecans, and the rich, sugary warmth of buttercream frosting kept it a stable, cool temperature behind thick glass display cases. Julian stood near the back corner, his worn leather jacket smelling faintly of damp wool. He held a small plastic basket containing a single loaf of sourdough and a small carton of organic milk. At 34, Julian carried the invisible, permanent fatigue of a man whose life was divided into strict, unyielding partitions. The early morning rush to get 7-year-old Leo dressed, fed, and off to school. The grueling hours at the logistics warehouse coordinating freight shipments, and the quiet, solitary evenings spent washing lunchboxes, folding tiny socks, and planning the next day's logistics. Being a single father wasn't just a title, it was an architecture of survival. Since Sarah had walked out 3 years ago, leaving behind a brief note and a half-empty crib, Julian had built a fortress of routine around his son. He had learned how to braid hair with clumsy, calloused fingers, how to fix a leaking bathroom sink while answering a work email on his phone, and how to smile through the hollow ache of holidays that felt too quiet. He glanced down at his wristwatch. It was 5:15 p.m. Leo was at home with Mrs. Gable, the kind retired neighbor who watched him until Julian's shift ended. Tonight was a special night, though Julian tried to keep his own expectations grounded. Tomorrow was Leo's 8th birthday. In the grand scheme of childhood, 8 was a milestone. It was the age where boys stopped believing in simple magic and started looking for real proof of it. For months, Leo had talked about one thing: the superhero universe. Specifically, Captain Vanguard, a fictional comic book hero who could manipulate light and defend the innocent. Leo didn't just like the character, he idolized him. He drew pictures of him on the margins of his math homework, wore a faded red cape around the house until it frayed at the edges, and spoke of him as if he were an older brother fighting battles in the clouds. Julian had saved for weeks for this moment. Working the late-night loading docks on weekends had netted him an extra $200 money that was supposed to go toward the electric bill, but had been quietly diverted into a secret envelope hidden beneath his socks in the top drawer. A custom, 2-tier birthday cake designed to look like Captain Vanguard's shield, complete with edible sugar glass stars and a blue and red fondant finish. It cost $120, an extravagant sum, for a man who counted every penny at the grocery store checkout, but when Julian imagined the look in Leo's wide, amber eyes when the candles were lit, the price vanished from his mind. It was worth every missed hour of sleep, every aching muscle in his back. He shifted his weight, preparing to step up to the register, when the sharp, strained sound of a voice cut through the soft murmur of the bakery's jazz playlist. "Please, is there any way, anything at all we can adjust it? Even if we take off the top tier? Or use a simpler filling?" The voice belonged to a woman standing directly at the front counter. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, but exhaustion had etched deep, pale shadows beneath her eyes. Her hair, tied back in a hasty, loose ponytail, was damp from the rain, clinging to the nape of her neck. She wore a faded canvas jacket that was zipped all the way to her chin, and her hands, chapped and bare of any jewelry, were clutched tightly around a scuffed leather handbag. Across the counter stood the bakery manager, a man with graying temples and an expression carved from professional, unyielding politeness. "I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Vance," the manager said, his tone flat and rehearsed. "The custom order rules are very clear. The design requires specialized artisanal sugarwork that our decorator, Chef Marcus, completed yesterday. Once a bespoke order of this scale is finalized and the deposit window closes, the remaining balance is due upon pickup. If we cancel or alter it now, we lose the perishable elements, and we can't resell a customized item with a child's name written across the frosting in gold leaf." I know," the woman whispered, her voice cracking slightly as she swallowed hard. fighting off the rising tide of public humiliation. I didn't mean to cause a problem. It's just an unexpected expense came up this morning. My car's transmission dropped fluid on the highway. I had to pay the tow truck driver and the diagnostic fee just to get it towed to a mechanic. My paycheck doesn't clear until Friday. And she stopped, pressing her lips together so hard they turned white. She looked down at the polished linoleum floor, her shoulders slumping as if an invisible, crushing weight had just been dropped onto her back. Julian, standing 10 feet away, froze. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the acoustics of the small bakery amplified every trembling syllable. He saw the way her knuckles turned white as she squeezed the strap of her bag. He saw the subtle, frantic tremor in her jaw as she fought back tears that were threatening to spill over her eyelashes. "So," the manager said, offering a tight, sympathetic, but completely immovable smile, "without the remaining $70, I legally can't release the cake to you. You can forfeit the $30 deposit. Or you can step aside and let me help the customers waiting in line behind you." The words felt like a physical blow. The woman let out a ragged, shallow breath, a sound so hollow and defeated that it seemed to drop the temperature in the entire room. She looked back toward the glass display case, where sitting on a revolving pedestal under a cool, illuminated dome was a magnificent creation, a vibrant, heroic cake adorned with a brilliant red star, sparkling blue frosting, and the bold, proud name Leo written in shimmering, edible gold across the base. Julian's breath caught in his throat. Leo. The coincidence hit him like a cold shock to the chest. Not just a birthday cake, but a birthday cake for a little boy named Leo. Julian looked down at his own basket. Inside sat a small, plain vanilla sponge cake with generic store-bought sprinkles, a fallback option he had picked up, just in case his own finances fell through at the last second, though he had intended to put it back. His mind flashed back 3 years. He remembered the night Sarah left. He remembered sitting on the edge of an empty mattress in an apartment that suddenly felt cavernous and terrifying, holding a 6-month-old baby who wouldn't stop crying because he could sense the panic in his father's pulse. He remembered the weeks where he lived on instant ramen and tap water just so he could afford formula and diapers, walking to interviews because he couldn't afford bus fare, wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too large because he had lost weight from stress. He remembered the paralyzing, suffocating fear of not being enough, the terrifying thought that every parent harbors in their darkest, loneliest hours. What if I fail them? What if my poverty, my struggles, and my mistakes permanently damage my child's world? The woman at the counter reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a worn debit card, and handed it to the clerk with a final, desperate plea. "Can you just try it one more time? Maybe the system? Maybe it went through this time?" The clerk swiped the card. A sharp, high-pitched electronic beep echoed through the small shop. "Declined." The woman closed her eyes. A single tear broke free, tracking a clean, wet path down her pale cheek before she caught it quickly with the back of her sleeve, pretending it was just rain. "I'm sorry," the clerk repeated, pushing the card back across the counter. "I can't override the terminal." "It's fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator units. "Thank you for trying." She turned around, her head bowed, ready to walk out into the pouring rain without the cake, without the celebration, carrying the crushing guilt of a mother who felt she had let her little boy down on the most important day of his year. Julian didn't think. He didn't calculate his grocery budget for the rest of the week, or worry about how he would pay his own water bill. The protective, fierce instinct of a father overrode every rational thought in his head. "Excuse me," Julian said, his voice deep and steady, cutting cleanly through the ambient noise of the bakery. The woman paused, turning her head slightly, her eyes red-rimmed and guarded. The manager looked up, surprised. Julian stepped forward, placing his small basket of groceries on an empty section of the counter. He pulled out his wallet, a worn, duct-taped leather billfold, and extracted a crisp, folded $100 bill and a 20, laying them flat on the glass surface between him and the clerk. Put the cake on my tab, Julian said quietly. All of it. The remaining balance, plus whatever you need to cover the packaging fee. The bakery manager blinked, staring down at the cash, then up at Julian. Sir, this customer's order is— I know what the order is, Julian interrupted, his voice calm, firm, and completely devoid of arrogance. I heard the conversation. Pay for the cake out of this, and give the rest of the change as a tip to the decorators in the back, who worked hard on it. The woman spun around, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. She stared at Julian as if he were a ghost, her lips parting slightly. No, no, please. You can't do that, she stammered, stepping back toward the counter as a defensive flush of color returned to her cheeks. Pride, sharp and defensive, flared in her eyes. I wasn't asking for charity. I don't know you. I can't take your money. Julian stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance so as not to crowd her. He looked into her eyes that held the exact same exhaustion, the exact same fierce, desperate love that he saw in his own bathroom mirror every single morning. You aren't taking charity, Julian said softly, his voice gentle. You're just accepting a little help from a fellow parent. Trust me. I know what it looks like out there. My son's name is Leo. He's turning 8 tomorrow. And if I know anything about 8-year-old boys, they believe in heroes who show up when things look dark. The woman's breath hitched. The mention of her son's name and the realization that this stranger had listened, understood, and matched her situation without a single ounce of judgment shattered her defenses entirely. The walls she had built up to keep her panic and humiliation hidden away crumbled in an instant. Her lower lip trembled violently. She raised a shaking hand to cover her mouth, but she couldn't stop the tears. They came fast and heavy, spilling over her eyelids as she let out a long, shuddering sob that seemed to draw the grief of the past year right out of her chest. The bakery manager, visibly moved by the silent exchange, quietly cleared his throat. He punched the register keys, collected Julian's cash, and immediately turned around to retrieve the magnificent Captain Vanguard cake from its pedestal, carefully sliding it into a sturdy white bakery box tied with a bright red ribbon. Here you go, ma'am, the manager said softly, his professional coldness entirely replaced by genuine warmth. And happy birthday to your little boy. Chapter 5. The threshold of tomorrow. Julian reached out and picked up the bakery box, feeling its weight substantial, cool, and filled with promise. He walked it over to the counter and placed it gently into the woman's trembling hands. She clutched the box to her chest as if it were the most fragile, precious thing in the universe. Water dripped from the brim of her jacket onto the cardboard, but she didn't care. She looked up at Julian, her eyes shining through a haze of unshed tears, her face a complex map of overwhelming gratitude, relief, and sheer disbelief. I don't even know your name, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. How can I possibly pay you back? You don't owe me a thing, Julian smiled, adjusting the collar of his leather jacket. Just make sure little Leo eats an extra slice for me. And tell him Captain Vanguard says hello. For a moment, neither of them moved. In the small, warm bakery, amidst the scent of vanilla and sugar, two strangers who had walked in carrying separate worlds of quiet desperation stood connected by an invisible, unbreakable thread of human empathy. It was a reminder that beneath the cold concrete, the traffic, the financial pressures, and the relentless demands of modern life, people still possess the capacity to see one another, to recognize pain, and to heal it with a simple, uncalculated act of grace. Thank you, the woman whispered, her voice breaking on the words. Thank you so much. Julian nodded slowly, offering a reassuring smile. Have a good night. Drive safe. He turned away, picked up his small basket of groceries, and paid for his milk and sourdough. When he stepped back outside into the rainy evening, the wind was still howling, and the streets were still slick and dark. But as he pulled his collar up against the chill and began the walk back toward his apartment, his chest felt remarkably light. Back home, Leo would be sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Gable, coloring pictures of spaceships and asking when Daddy would be home. And tomorrow morning, when the sun finally broke through the gray clouds and illuminated the small living room, there would be pancakes on the griddle, laughter in the air, and the quiet, steady proof that no matter how heavy life became, love in all its stubborn, everyday glory would always find a way to show up. The alarm clock on Julian's nightstand did not ring with a harsh, metallic buzz. It played a gentle, rising chime that Julian had carefully selected months ago to keep from startling Leo awake in the adjacent twin bed. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Saturday. Outside the frosted apartment window, the relentless rain of the previous evening had cleared, leaving behind a crisp, washed, clean morning sky the color of periwinkle. A brilliant shaft of golden sunlight cut across the hardwood floor, illuminating floating dust motes and landing squarely on the edge of a blue superhero cape draped neatly over the back of a wooden chair. Julian sat up, rubbing the remaining grit of sleep from his eyes. His back ached slightly from the long shifts at the warehouse, but the dull throb was entirely eclipsed by a strange, buoyant energy in his chest. Today was the day. Leo was 8 years old. He slipped out from under the covers, making sure not to creak the floorboards, and padded quietly down the short hallway into the kitchen. The apartment was tidy, smelling faintly of lingering coffee and the cinnamon toast Mrs. Gable had helped Leo make yesterday afternoon before she left. On the kitchen counter sat the modest, plain vanilla cake with colorful sprinkles that Julian had bought the night before, a backup plan that now felt wonderfully unnecessary. But more importantly, resting on the kitchen table was a pristine, heavy white bakery box, tied with a thick red ribbon. Julian smiled to himself, remembering the look of absolute shock and the tears of relief in the bakery the night before. He had carried that box home like it was made of spun glass, placing it safely in the back of the refrigerator away from prying eyes. "Dad?" Julian turned around. Standing in the doorway of his bedroom was Leo. His brown hair was sticking up in 3 unruly tufts like a startled bird's feathers. And he was wearing his favorite pajamas, faded flannel bottoms, patterned with tiny rocket ships. He rubbed his eyes with both fists, blinking sleepily against the morning light. "Happy birthday, buddy," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave into a warm, soft register as he walked over and scooped his son up into a tight, lifting embrace. Leo let out a sleepy giggle, wrapping his small arms around Julian's neck. "Am I 8 today?" "You are officially 8 years old," Julian confirmed, setting him gently back down on his feet. "An entire decade, minus 2 years. Practically a grown man." Leo grinned, his front teeth showing a charming gap, and immediately dashed over to the chair where his red cape was waiting, tying it securely around his neck with a practiced knot. "Did Captain Vanguard come last night?" "Well," Julian said with a mysterious smile, walking over to the refrigerator and opening the door. "He might not have dropped by in person, but I think he left something very important in our custody." Julian pulled the heavy white box from the shelf and set it down on the kitchen table. Leo's eyes widened to the size of saucers. He walked slowly toward the table, as if approaching a wild animal or a sacred artifact, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the slick red ribbon. "Is that?" Leo whispered, his voice breathless. "Is that the Captain Vanguard shield cake?" "Open it and see," Julian said, his heart swelling with a profound, quiet pride. Leo carefully untied the knot, lifting the cardboard lid away. Inside, illuminated by the morning sun, was the magnificent 2-tier masterpiece. The vibrant red star gleamed against deep blue fondant, bordered by edible silver piping that caught the light. Across the base, written in shimmering gold letters, was the name, Leo. Leo stood frozen, staring down at the cake with an expression of pure, unfiltered awe. For a full 10 seconds, he didn't say a word. Then he looked up at his father, his amber eyes shining with unshed tears of pure joy. "Dad, how? This costs $1 million. It looks like it came straight out of the comic book." Julian knelt down so he was eye level with his son, resting a warm, calloused hand on Leo's small shoulder. "It didn't cost $1 million, buddy," Julian said softly, "but it did take a little bit of magic. You see, yesterday at the bakery, something special happened. Another mom was there, and she was having a really hard day. Her plans fell apart, and she couldn't get the cake she needed for her little boy." Leo's expression shifted instantly from wonder to deep, childish empathy. The playful superhero bravado faded, replaced by the gentle, kind heart that Julian loved most about him. "Did she cry?" "She did," Julian nodded gently. "And it reminded me of how important it is that we look out for each other. Because in this life, no matter how tough things get, there is always room to help someone else carry their weight. When we help others, we make the whole world a little bit safer and a little bit brighter." Leo looked back down at the cake, then up at his father, processing the lesson with a wisdom beyond his years. He threw his arms around Julian's neck, hugging him fiercely. "Thanks, Dad. Can we eat it now?" Julian laughed, a rich, full sound that echoed off the apartment walls. "Well, we have to sing happy birthday first. But after that, you can have the entire shield." 10 miles away, on the other side of the rain-slicked city, another apartment was waking up to a very different kind of morning light. Clara Vance stood in her small, warm kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. Her worn canvas jacket hung neatly on the back of the door, completely dry now. On the kitchen counter sat the exact same white bakery box with the red ribbon, safely preserved overnight. Her 7-year-old son, Toby, was still asleep down the hall. Today was his birthday, the milestone he had been counting down to on his calendar, with big red X's, for 3 solid months. Clara walked over to the refrigerator, pulled out a carton of milk, and paused. Memories of the previous evening flooded back into her mind with startling clarity. She remembered the humiliation of the declined card, the crushing weight of the car repair bill, the feeling that she was failing as a mother, and then, like a sudden break-in storm, clouds the deep. Resonant voice of the stranger in the leather jacket. Julian. She didn't even know his full name, but she remembered his face, the calm, steady kindness in his eyes, and the gentle way he had spoken about his own son, Leo. He hadn't offered pity, he had offered solidarity. He had looked at her not as a failure, but as a fellow parent doing the best she could in a difficult world. A tear slipped down Clara's cheek, but this time there was no panic behind it, only a profound, swelling sense of gratitude and peace. She walked down the quiet hallway and gently pushed open Toby's bedroom door. Toby was curled up under his heavy dinosaur quilt, one arm draped over the edge of the bed. As the morning sunlight spilled across his face, he stirred, blinking sleepily. "Good morning, birthday boy," Clara whispered, walking over and sitting down on the edge of the mattress, running her fingers gently through his messy hair. Toby smiled a sleepy, crooked grin. "Am I 8? "You are 8, Clara smiled, her voice thick with emotion. "And I have a secret to tell you. Captain Vanguard sent a special delivery last night." Toby's eyes shot wide open, all traces of sleep vanishing instantly. He sat straight up in bed. "No way." "Really?" "Really?" Clara laughed, taking his hand and leading him down the hall toward the kitchen. When Clara opened the white box and revealed the magnificent Captain Vanguard cake, Toby gasped, clapping his hands over his mouth in absolute disbelief. He stared at the shimmering gold letters, the brilliant red star, and the immaculate blue frosting. "Mom, how did you do this? I thought you said things were tight?" Toby asked, looking up at her with wide, reverent eyes. Clara knelt down beside him, pulling him into a warm, fierce embrace, resting her chin on the top of his head. "I had a little help, sweetheart," Clara whispered softly, looking out the kitchen window toward the bright, clear sky where the morning sun was climbing higher. "A very kind stranger reminded me of something important. He showed me that no matter how dark things look, there are always heroes in the world, and sometimes they show up right when you need them most." Toby nodded solemnly, tightening his arms around her neck. "When I grow up, I want to be a hero like that, Mom. I want to help people, too." Clara smiled, closing her eyes as a deep, unshakable warmth filled her heart. "I know you will, buddy. I know you will. Thank you so much for watching today's story. If this video touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Solo Dad Stories for more touching tales about family, dignity, and second chances. Let us know in the comments below which moment stayed with you the most. We'll see you in the next video. Take care.